Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C., and this is our February 5th, 2012 legislative update coming from sunny and sort of warmish Washington, D.C. today. A lot of stuff going on. Congress is starting to get itself organized. The new administration is starting to pull together. It takes a long time to get an administration up and running. But we're starting to see early moves on legislation in Congress, so we can start to talk about that. But before we do, someone pointed out to me that I never went over the budget numbers from the 2021 budget that passed back in December. So I very quickly just wanted to just bring them to your attention. This is a little chart for the appropriation numbers. We have the president's request, the House budget, the Senate budget, and the final budget numbers. And as you can see, most of our budgets did reasonably well, not fantastically, but reasonably well. And some specifics on there. Total R&D was up 0.9%, which isn't that great, but there's a reason for that, which we'll get to in a second. Basic research, which is the part of the research budget we are most interested in, was up 5%. Good, beats inflation, not extraordinary. The problem with the total R&D numbers in the budget was the facilities budget, which was down 20%, which sounds awful. But you got to remember that in the 2020 budget, there was a big increase in facilities money to build and renovate some of the research facilities around the country. So what this budget represents is a reversion to the norm. And the 2021 numbers are still above the 2019 numbers. But it looks like a big decrease because we didn't get the big jump that we saw last year was not continued. But then again, we didn't expect it to be continued. Defense R&D did not particularly well, beat inflation, but not by much, up 3.3%, excuse me. Non-defense R&D was up 1.4%, not bad. R&D, energy R&D was up 11%, which is pretty good, except that a lot of that was consumed by the atomic defense, which is basically upgrading our nuclear weapons and our nuclear storage facilities, which is obviously important, but it's not really research. Office of Science budget was up 4.3%, which is good. NSF up 3.5%, NIST up 2.2%, NASA up 3%. Parts of NASA, particularly space missions, were up a lot, which is good. So again, 2021 budget was a decent budget for us. Almost all of our budgets at least kept up with inflation, but was not terribly exciting. We've already started working with Congress on the 2022 budget, even though we do not expect the president's budget to be out until April, which is normal for a new administration. A deal has been struck in the Senate moving on to this year. As expected, Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell reached an agreement on power sharing in the Senate. Since it's 50-50 split, there is no majority. But as is tradition, the party that controls the White House becomes the majority leader and chairman of the various committees. So the deal that was reached between Schumer and McConnell was basically the same deal that the Republicans and Democrats had back in 2001, which is the last time both parties shared power. Committee seats and committee budgets will be divided evenly between the two parties. Again, that's what happened in 2021. More amendments will be allowed. This is there's nothing specific here. Senator Schumer just agreed to allow more amendments than usual. That is a way of giving the minority party, the Republicans in this case, more ability to influence legislation because they get to at least have their amendments heard. The big sticking point, as we talked about last time, was the filibuster. Senator McConnell had asked that Senator Schumer promise to take changes to the filibuster rules off the table. Filibuster is the Senate rule that says that legislation other than budget legislation needs 60 Senate votes, not 50, to pass. Since the Democrats only have 50 votes, that would require the Democrats to get at least some support from Republicans, even with the vice president's vote. Senator Schumer refused to take filibuster reform off the table, but Senators Sinema from Arizona and Manchin from West Virginia both very clearly and publicly said that they were opposed to changes to the filibuster rules, which was enough for McConnell to allow the deal to move forward. So that is where we are now, and as we speak, the Senate is getting itself organized. Committees are being named, committee leaders are being identified, and they are starting to get work done on their priorities. The Democrats, parts of the Democratic leadership team that we particularly care about, Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader. Dick Durbin is, as expected, the Judiciary Chair, and Senator Manchin will be the chair of the Energy and Natural Resource Committee. Those are two of the committees that we work with most closely. We are excited about all of these. We have good relationships with all three offices. I also want to note these pictures come from the Senate web pages. I always try to use the official pictures for members of Congress just so nobody accuses me of bias or anything. It is normal, however, for legislators to get official picture taken early in their legislative tenure and then keep it forever. I just want to note that Senator Schumer has actually updated his picture. He's looking considerably older than the picture he was using last year. And I think we should recognize honesty when we see it. We have honesty in photos by the Senate Majority Leader, which I think is a nice change. The Republican leaders, the ranking minority members of the various committees, Mitch McConnell will be the minority leader for the Senate. Chuck Grassley will be the number 2 on the Judiciary Committee, and John Barrasso is number 2 on Energy and Natural Resources, a change from Murkowski from Alaska. Barrasso is going to be interesting. Well, first of all, Senator Grassley is a good friend of ours. We've worked with him on immigration reform and a number of other issues for decades. And so that's very exciting. Senator Barrasso is from Wyoming, which is the state in which IEEE has the fewest members, which makes that a bit of a challenge. We had a good meeting with his staff as part of the CVD last year. We did it by phone. So IEEE-USA will be leaning on our relatively few. We have a little more than 100 IEEE members in Wyoming, and we'll be using them to convey our ideas and opinions to the senator. And then probably our most important committee in the Senate, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, we have, as expected, Senator Maria Cantwell and Senator Roger Wicker. Wicker has not been, the Republican committee chairs have not been officially named yet, but we expect them actually today. They may have been between now and when I checked earlier this morning. But we're pretty sure we know who they're going to be. And so we have good relationships with these offices as well, which puts us in a good position to be heard throughout the 117th Congress. Congress's first priority is the COVID relief bill, which is already sort of moving in Congress. Joint budget reconciliation motions have passed both the House and the Senate. Now, important to note what that means. The joint budget resolution is not the bill. The joint budget resolution is an internal congressional tool used to send instructions to the appropriators and the committees that are developing government spending bills. It's part of the process, but those resolutions don't actually say what's in the bill. Typically, they say how much a committee is allowed to spend, which in this case is $1.9 trillion, and then give some instructions on how it should be spent, but it has no details. Once that instruction has been passed, and it has been passed basically on party line votes in both the House and the Senate, Vice President Harris had to break the tie to pass the budget reconciliation motion in the Senate for the first time. Now that it's passed, the committees can start working on the actual COVID relief bill. And while we know what the bill will look like, kind of, there's still a lot of unknowns, and we don't have legislative text yet. The thing with using a budget reconciliation motion is that it exempts the legislation from the filibuster rules. Budget bills can pass on simply a 51-vote margin in the Senate, which allows the Democrats to move legislation without any Republican support at all, which is fine, except that there are rules, specifically the Byrd rule, named after Harry Byrd from West Virginia back in the 80s, who put some constraints on this. In order to move a piece of legislation under the budget reconciliation process, the bill has to deal with spending, or raising of government funds. And any provisions that don't do that, or do that in a very minimal way, are subject to a filibuster motion. A senator, this only matters in the Senate, not the House, a senator can object to that provision, and then it needs 60 votes to remain in the bill, which means some pieces of President Biden's agenda for this particular bill probably won't survive in the final version. The provisions that we know of, and again, the bill's not written, so all this can change, but it looks like the Congress is going to be trying to give Americans a $1,400 stimulus check, declining after you pass, and again, these numbers aren't in law yet, so they might move, $75,000 for an individual or $150,000 in income for the year for a married couple. So if you pass those thresholds, your check starts to decline. It will include a lot of aid to state and local governments, more money for vaccine research, production, distribution, all the things associated with getting vaccines to American people quickly, funds to reopen schools, and a $15 minimum wage for the entire country. And that's the provision that's likely to be removed, if it is in there at all. That's not a budget provision. The government telling companies what they have to pay their workers doesn't actually cost the government anything. And if it does, it's incidental to the actual effect of the provision. So under the Byrd rule, that could be challenged in the Senate. It probably would. The White House has already indicated they expect that to be removed from the bill. But other than that, everything else is a spending measure, and so it presumably will remain. Congress will probably take the bulk of February to actually develop the legislation. It'll be fast-tracked, but, it takes time to put this stuff together. And so I would expect a COVID bill end of this month, early next month. Now, there's some smaller bills that are starting to reappear from previous Congresses, and it's a little too early for me to tell you which of these bills are important and which ones are just going to sit there for the next 2 years, but I wanted to bring your attention to them anyway. The RISE Act has been reintroduced, and this is the Research Investment to Spark the Economy Act, which I'm going to spell out because there are actually a couple of RISE Acts in last Congress and then presumably this Congress as well. This is the 2020 version of the bill, is $26 billion to support university research. The idea there is that universities incurred a significant amount of cost when COVID shut down their research departments. And so they had to spend money to shut experiments down and then had to spend money to ramp them back up again. They spent money keeping lab assistants and lab techs on payrolls, even though they weren't doing any work. And so the universities are looking for some help paying for that. This was introduced by Congresswoman DeGette and Congressman Upton, bipartisan. It's bipartisan in both House and the Senate. The thing is, this was introduced last year, and it didn't get a particularly good reception on Capitol Hill. It got a better reception than the other requests for financial help from the universities, but it still didn't go anywhere. So this bill is not going to pass on its own. It's not going to be a standalone measure, probably. But it may get tucked into the COVID bill, and that is, in fact, what the sponsors are trying to do. $26 billion isn't really all that much money compared to $1.9 trillion, but it's still a decent-sized chunk of money for universities. The PRO Act actually should have been introduced in the last half an hour or so. I will check after the call to make sure it has. You may recall the PRO Act was introduced last year. It is primarily a labor unionizing bill. It changes all sorts of rules to make it easier for people to join labor unions, for labor unions to organize, and puts constraints on businesses in how they deal with labor. However, it also includes the ABC test. Recall this is a test that is used to determine if someone is an employee or a consultant. It is part of AB 5, the bill out, it's the heart of AB 5, as a matter of fact, in California, and has caused some trouble for IEEE members in California who are consultants, who have difficulty conforming to the law. Interestingly, the ABC test has been the law in Massachusetts for a while and actually hasn't been a problem, at least as far as I can tell. I've been talking to IEEE consultants in Massachusetts, and they say it just doesn't come up. which is interesting because it's the same bill essentially, except there are a lot more exemptions and exceptions in California than there are in Massachusetts. We, IEEE-USA staff, are working with the drafters and sponsors of the PRO Act to see if we can get some language in there ensuring that the effect of the bill on technology consultants is similar to Massachusetts and not California. By the way, if any IEEE members have experience with ABC test, if you could let me know, I really like to know your experiences to get a firsthand account of how this bill works. Interesting bill from Congressman Foster. Congressman Foster used to work at one of the national labs, and so he's a good friend of the technology and science communities. It's the Improving Digital Identity Act, which this is, again, it was introduced last year. It hasn't been introduced this year, although Congressman Foster says he would. And it creates a task force to develop a new national digital ID and asks NIST to set standards for digital identity verification. This is probably, it's a good idea. The United States has been relying on Social Security numbers, which are not secure, for way too long. We need something a little more secure for our online activities and purchases than we currently have. The sponsors, Congressman Foster is the primary sponsor of the bill, but Congressman Cato, Langervin, Loudermilk, and San Nicolas are all original co-sponsors of the bill. Actually, San Nicolas came out a little later. He's not original. But you have in that list 2 Democrats, including the sponsor, and 3 Republicans, making it nice and bipartisan. Also worth noting that San Nicolas is the shadow congressperson from Guam. So he's not really a full member of Congress. He can't vote on the floor, but he can put his name on legislation and he can vote in committee. And so it's nice to see our shadow legislators engaging on technology legislation. Other thing to note here is that Colorado is working on developing a digital state ID. Now, that's good and probably good for the citizens of Colorado if they do it right, but it would become a problem if each one of the states had different standards for these IDs and had different IDs. We really need a national ID, and so possibly the Colorado situation will poke Congress into taking this issue seriously. Because if you don't, you end up with a mess, which is what we're starting to see in the data privacy space. The state of Virginia is set to pass a new data privacy law soon. It has passed both the House and Senate in Richmond with overwhelming bipartisan support. The governor has indicated he will likely sign it. It gives individuals the right to access their data, to correct it, to have it deleted. It gives them the ability to opt out of companies using their personal data for advertising, from the companies selling their personal data, and for profiling, and puts enforcement in the hands of the Attorney General. Now, I mention that because Virginia would become the 4th state with a digital privacy law. California, Maine, and Nevada already have them. In addition, 9 other states are actively currently debating digital privacy laws, and 15 additional states considered them last year, which puts us over half. Here's the problem. They're not the same law. They're similar, but they're not the same. Each state has its own idiosyncrasies and its other little quirks, which is going to make it increasingly difficult for the tech companies to comply with all the various state laws. This is precisely the scenario we thought would happen before Congress actually starts doing a digital privacy law. We already have Europe with GDPR has their digital privacy laws. California has a pretty strict law that's been on the books for a couple of years now. Maine and Nevada just got on board recently. Virginia's about to do it. We should see a couple other states do the same thing. At some point, the tech companies will simply go to Congress and say, look, we will comply with the spirit of all these laws, but you got to give us one set of details. It is simply too expensive and too hard to comply with privacy law, 50 privacy laws across the United States, plus a different law for Europe, Canada, and all the other countries. So I suspect the Virginia law will help push Congress into doing something about this. They've been talking about it for a while. It's about time they stepped up. Interesting idea from Kathy McMorris Rogers, Congresswoman from Eastern Washington State. She's the ranking minority member of the House Armed Services Committee, the House Armed Services Committee. And she's proposed creating a new military academy. Now, we don't have details, but it does not sound as though this is a new West Point. It's something smaller and simpler than that. But the purpose would be to train military and civilian DoD professionals on cyber and AI technology, basically taking the military workforce, military and civilian workforce in the DoD that work on cyber and AI issues to provide them cutting edge technology, sort of like an officer training school or the War College. This seems like an interesting idea. She has just proposed it, so I can't tell you if it has legs or not. But we do know the DoD has had a difficult time finding and retaining really high-quality cyber professionals. Fact is, the private sector pays a lot better than the military, and those folks are in enormous demand. And so this could help DoD stay ahead of foreign adversaries and keeping its cyber and AI technology up to date. A quick reminder that registration for our CVVD is open. We're aiming for the last week of March to set up virtual meetings with your legislators. You can find out more information about CVD at IEEEUSA.org/CVD and register for the event. If you're interested in having a conversation with your legislators, particularly if you have new legislators, we'd certainly love to have you join us. The CVD is open to all IEEE members in the United States, and it is free of charge. I wanted to extend congratulations to the IEEE team behind the gravitational wave antenna. This was given IEEE milestone status by the IEEE last year, and there was an event to honor LIGOS, the research behind those projects. It originally was supposed to be an in-person event, but it was a virtual event that happened on Wednesday, hosted by IEEE-USA. Key speakers at that event to recognize this accomplishment include IEEE-USA President Kate Duncan, the director of the NSF, Seth Murray Pashanathan, the governor of Washington State, the president of Tuscany, and Drs. Weiss, Barish, and Thorne, all Nobel laureates in this space, as well as a considerable number of additional dignitaries, all of which can be found at gwamilestone.com or IEEEUSA.org. I especially wanted to congratulate Jonathan Cho, who is the producer of these updates. He is always working in the background to make sure I look and sound respectable, which is quite a difficult challenge. And Jonathan was also the brains behind the LIGOS online event, and he deserves recognition and credit for his excellent work on that project. Our next update is February 19th. We should be right in the middle of impeachment hearings in the Senate by then, if it's not already over, which would be nice. And the administration should start functioning more, well, not fully up to speed, but we'll start to get people approved by the Senate by then, so the various agencies can start functioning. So we should have lots and lots to talk about. I am Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations at IEEE-USA in Washington. My phone number is 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@IEEE.org. If you have any questions about anything we talked about today or anything we didn't talk about today, please feel free to reach out and let me know how I or IEEE can be of service. And with that, I'm going to shut down this and go to the other screen to see if we have questions. If you have questions, please pop them in the comment box and we will rotate back to them and see if we can get them answered. And if not, that is fine too. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope you have an excellent February. Question from Robert Burke. How do we get involved in the digital ID effort? That is an excellent question. Last year, the bill didn't go anywhere. It was introduced to start getting a conversation started. IEEE-USA staff will reach out to Congressman Forrester, with whom we talk regularly anyway. Well, his staff we talk with regularly. Let me reach out to him and find out what the plan is before I tell you exactly what we can do about it. But I'll include this in the talk in 2 weeks, let you know where we stand. Dr. Godfrey has a question. What impact the California Digital Privacy Act? What impact has it had on personal privacy? You know, I haven't heard a lot of evaluations either. I've heard a lot of anecdotes. It appears as though companies are not having a particularly difficult time handling the California privacy law. GDPR is causing some heartburn. That's the European law, because it is more onerous, but also because the penalties for violating GDPR are pretty extreme, whereas the California penalties aren't as bad. I think the challenge is going to be when you have laws in multiple states with what's known as private right of action. Private right of action means if a company fails to protect your digital privacy rights, you can hire a lawyer and sue them. And if the penalties are high enough, this obviously attracts a lot of lawyers. You get class action lawsuits, and suddenly you have lots and lots of money flying around. The Virginia law, importantly, does not have a private right of action. It says if your rights are violated, you can complain to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General can bring a lawsuit, but that's a little different. So as these, the details of what you have to do to comply with the law are one thing, but then there's the penalties for failing to comply and kind of the legal standards for what is an honest mistake and what is a actionable error matter. And once kind of the lawsuits start coming, that's when the pressure will get ramped up on Congress to standardize everything. All right, we'll try this again. I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Hope everyone enjoys the Super Bowl on Sunday, and I look forward to talking with all of you again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
So what I love about IEEE is that it really allows the convening of people of like minds over interesting domains to come together.
I think I've been able to successfully use IEEE-USA to position and leverage myself to be in the cutting edge in my industry.
I remember growing up, I used to always like to be creative, and I wasn't necessarily the best painter or the best person at drawing, but I loved art because I was creating something. And engineering really gave me that toolbox of knowledge to solve bigger and more exciting problems.
I've traveled all over getting to know friends at IEEE. We've got a great network. Sometimes when we take apart a new gizmo, we don't understand something, or we need to find an expert on acoustics or signal engineering or antenna design. And I've got a group of friends that I've met through the years at IEEE conferences, and it's really fantastic to be able to call up the right expert at the right moment.
Without IEEE, I don't think I would have the network that I have. What IEEE enables is this cross-pollination of generations of roboticists, those that are older to those that are younger.
One of the other things that I get really excited about outside of the work is sharing my knowledge and my excitement with other people. One of the ways that volunteering has really helped me to give back was to connect with people who are where I was when I started my career.
I really think paying it forward and being able to help another person achieve their dreams in engineering is something that really is fulfilling for me to do.
Students and the younger generation, they need to see themselves as the future. So as engineers, we need to show them that this is possible, that they too can be engineers.
I remember handing a kid an iPod and saying, "Hey, do you want to take this apart?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, "No, it's okay, you can take it apart." And his eyes lit up. He was so excited because every single adult his entire life has been telling him, "Don't take that apart." And I was the first one that gave him permission. And he sat there for an hour taking this iPod apart and putting it back together. That's how we're going to get the next generation of innovation that we need. That's how we're going to build a sustainable electronics industry. It starts with the kids, and we have to get them excited about tinkering.
I've been fortunate enough to volunteer with IEEE and IEEE-USA, enabling me to attend conferences where the best part about it is I get to meet people inside and outside of what I do. Meet with them, network with them, understand some of their challenges, and think about ideas that are completely outside of the box. And I get to share and disseminate that information and really make a contribution to my career.
IEEE-USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, you got this.
We need more engineers in the world. Engineers make the world better. They are designing the systems that keep the world working.
Now, the reason why I keep on renewing my membership with IEEE today is I feel a sense of belonging within IEEE.
This isn't just an organization I'm a part of. This is a family.
I've got buddies that I've met at IEEE conferences that will be lifelong friends. We need more engineers, and IEEE is leading the way to make that happen.
I want everyone to think like an engineer and be an engineer, because engineers, we solve problems and we make the world a better place.
IEEE is all about a sense of community.
And having an organization like IEEE-USA being there, cheering me on, supporting me, has really made me want to be the best engineer I could be.
IEEE-USA is my competitive edge.